Good day, namaste, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Claire Calvo, and this is Conscious Living. Today, I have someone back, actually, first time for the podcast, but he's been on the Daily Renewal a few times. He is a clinical psychologist, and we're going to discuss today stress and how stress affects our overall well-being, mentally, emotionally, physically. I have Dr. Juan Rapadas in the studio. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Rapadas. So we actually had another really interesting topic a couple of weeks ago, but it was flagged inappropriate. So we kind of broadened our topic this week.
We're trying to stay appropriate.
Yeah.
Now people are like, what is she talking about?
Well, I mean, but I think we could say that what we were discussing kind of falls into this bigger arena of mental health, mental emotional health, and how stress plays a critical role. I mean, we're holistic beings, so obviously it's going to affect stress, is going to affect us in more than just one way, right? They say stress is the root of most diseases, and by saying that, obviously they don't just mean physical health.
Yeah.
So can you just share, you've been in the practice for how long?
Gosh, maybe 20 or about 20 years plus. Yeah. Somewhere between 20 and 25 years. Yeah.
And I know we spoke.
I started when I was 15 years old. Not really.
But being in this field, I'm sure you've seen a whole range, obviously, of stressors in life. Actually,
I went to my doctor recently, and we talked about losing weight and trying to get healthier. And what's often the case for people like me, we don't take care of our stress because of what we hear every day in our practice is very stressful. Yeah. We listen to all the disturbing details of people's past, which usually filled with trauma and sadness, disappointment, suicides, violence, drug abuse. Someone asked me just recently, goes, how do you even get over that? How do you process it? And I just realized, talking with my doctor who was trying to decide what blood tests and things to do, he realized we should check your cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, and come to find that my cortisol levels are really high. So that means,
shocking.
Yeah. Well, and what it means was, but it's also a weird. The results was it's high, but then my body was trying to find a way to mitigate itself, because what it was manifesting in it was high blood pressure. So constant high blood pressure.
Yeah.
And I was really worried because, at my age and when you worry about blood pressure, how it can, cause to give you a stroke and heart attack.
Right.
So, he gave me some supplements, minerals to lower the cortisol levels, and I think I was lagging in testosterone, which just happens when you get older. And testosterone is the one that gives you the muscle and the strength and the energy.
Right.
And I felt with the stress level of my job, it was affecting my energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
That happens. It basically when they get older, hormone levels start to drop for a lot of things. So so he gave me some things to try to increase that as well. So what we concluded was I needed some help, but that without his help, I wasn't doing terribly, but I wasn't doing good. In other words, my body was trying to compensate in some way, and the way I was compensating it was through the my mental strength. So, for example, I was thinking more positively. I was compartmentalizing all the traumas and all the stress, and I just put it away, and not even think about it. And focus on the positive things, not the good things. My kids, success, and the future. So I can do that, I guess, partly because of my background, and plus.
So would you suggest that though? Because I mean, as far as compartmentalizing, because I know men seem to have a better way of compartmentalizing than women do. I don't mean to make that stereotype or that generalization.
It is a stereotype, but in my experience, and all you asked me how many years I've been doing this, I've seen that. And again, not an excuse for men to not be talkative and emotional to their partner, but I think a lot of it, this idea that we can do that is evolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
So I always tell this story when I present stuff on stress and depression, is that think about the 10,000 years ago when the men were the hunters, right? The women were the gatherers.
Right.
And what was the men's main job? Two main jobs is to hunt for food, and also to protect.
Right.
So if we're warring factions, warring tribes, and there were a lot, when one tribe wants to get all the stuff from the other tribe, they generally kill the strong men.
Right.
So they would fight.
Yeah.
So it's probably better for a male of the species to not be very emotional when it comes to looking and fighting the wild boar and looking and fighting other people. So if you had men throughout the centuries who were like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared, I don't think we should deal with these guys.
And analyze the whole
it's probably a bit. So I'd be the first one to be killed. My genetic material won't pass.
Yeah.
And so the male species learned to just kind of, it's like, just keep quiet.
Yeah.
Because you have to really tread lightly, and you don't show your emotions, especially to other men, and those type of things. Now, recently there was actually this basketball tournament.
Yeah.
It was New Zealand, New Zealand versus Guam, and very curious. Right before the game, New Zealanders do the haka.
Right.
Now that haka is a warrior dance, and the only emotion that comes from that is when you watch that is like fear. And
it's
like,
very aggressive.
Very aggressive, right?
Yeah.
Right. You don't see something. Them.
It's not very.
Yeah, they're not
fluid,
and they're not talking about love and stuff.
Right,
it's like I'm gonna beat you up and I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah.
Which is what they do to intimidate the opponent. And of course, they knew the Guam people knew it was coming, but I was watching as a boy. It looked like, if you're really on Guam, it's almost like you say ha.
Exactly.
It's like they were saying ha to them.
Right. Puffing out their chest.
Yeah. So that's evolution. So as the male species, testosterone, we had learned to keep silent, hold your emotions in, and also socially as a boy. I think I mentioned this last time. Socializing as a boy, the famous saying, "Don't cry, stop crying." What are you? Are you a girl? Right? And we socialize boys/teens to keep it all in.
Yeah.
Whereas girls, we tell them to let it all out and express their emotions.
But the dangerous thing is when you don't fall into that so easily, and then having that label put on you of like, oh, you're being whatever.
Wimpy.
Exactly.
So what happens is, and that becomes deleterious and destructive to men's health. So is it any wonder that men have the highest mortality rates? I think women live longer, 8 to 10 years longer than men over the years. Men have higher suicide rates, higher homicide rates. They have higher heart attacks, diabetes, all that stuff. So we are not good caretakers of ourselves, which is very interesting. Why actually married men live much longer than single men,
as well as women, right?
I don't know. The argument is about women, because the reason why married men live longer because the women take care of them.
And
the women say,
and the women outlive the men.
Yeah, well, yeah, you should go to the doctor.
Right.
The women, they keep telling their husband to go to the doctor even though they want to. Whereas the single man is like, they'll just probably die alone in their apartment playing video games, watching,
well, true story.
Internet.
Yeah, true story.
Stuff.
My parents are 86, and my mom, I would say for the past 5 years, is constantly, Dad needs to get checked for this. Dad needs. All the focus has been on him, and it's like, okay, Mom, now your turn. Even just something like taking her blood pressure, like, no. She doesn't want to do anything for herself.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's good for a man to be married or in a long-term relationship because they do live longer. Because we're terrible at taking care of ourselves. I mean, there's no excuse of us being quiet. The quiet. What do you call it? The mysterious man. That's really.
But I think now it's more than talking about men and women. It's more of just like feminine energy and masculine energy. Don't you think? Because I mean now, I think it's becoming more accepted because people are feeling more comfortable just be authentic with what they resonate more
Mhm,
with. You
mhm.
know, some people feel more masculine energy than feminine, and I think that too is also with the labels. You know, like if you, I remember hearing somewhere or reading somewhere, when you what is it? When you labeled me, you negate me, and it's kind of like even, you know, lately just seeing with the cyberbullying and things, so many kids go through, especially young kids, go through this depression and go through attempted suicides
Yeah.
because of this cyberbullying and because of this identification of picking a label or labeling someone else, you know?
Right, and I think that so that's probably a newer phenomenon ish because of the internet
Mm-hmm.
and the bullying. I think that I think, however, knowing because I practice on Guam,
Yeah.
there's still, and this may sound pejorative, but there's just a lot of guys who are still cavemen.
Oh yeah, yeah. The
So they're-
mentality of just very much.
Well, they're not even doing the internet. They have no idea what Twitter is.
Oh, I
and
see,
They
okay.
really don't. And there's really only a small percentage of people, except maybe the younger kids who are growing up, who really get bullied on the internet. They're busy just bullying their families.
Right, right.
And
Well, the thing is, bullies come in all ages,
Yeah.
shapes, and sizes.
yeah, and it's part and parcel of the masculine energy,
Yeah.
or just kind of knowing, this is all I've known, and I always try when I talk to men or groups of men regarding domestic violence and this aggressive family violence. I said, you can't use that as an excuse anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, because what we know is that there are alternative ways of dealing with things. So you're basically choosing.
Yeah.
So he says, oh, this is older than you, and it's all the way I was raised. I said, and that may be true,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of their fathers and grandfathers were pretty old-fashioned.
Yeah.
You know, like your dad and,
Right.
and his dad,
It's ending
pretty
that
old-fashioned, ending the cycle.
Mhm.
But sadly, even our young men who learn violence from their father, they're also not enlightened.
Mhm.
They're not
Right.
on the they're not.
Yeah.
They're going the way of
Not as connected.
yeah,
right?
to the better, the newer parts of life, the
Yeah.
new man, the new way of looking at. They're kind of stuck,
Yeah.
and they're very difficult to make them unstuck, because they're stuck in the old ways, and they can't learn new ways to relate to people, and to communicate and learn new things, learn new ways to communicate,
Yeah.
and be more enlightened.
So I'm curious about that, because I find by, going through, whether it's social media or just going through the internet, doing research and connecting with others, there's a lot of healing. Like for me, going, whatever's traumas I've experienced, I found that when you share your story, it's healing for yourself, but also connecting with others so they don't feel alone. It brings you more, for me at least, it feels therapeutic. And in talking to others, especially, that's why they have these, groups, to share.
Talking circles.
Right,
yeah.
right. So like for someone who I guess is not, how would you approach something like that if someone is not accustomed to or not really willing?
Okay, so there's two ways there are two real ways to talk with a man.
Mhm.
So aggressive man who is engaged in family violence or drugs and alcohol, and both ways are effective, and it's basically just your cliche counseling, individual counseling,
Mhm.
then you get the group counseling where you're held accountable by other
Right.
men. Okay, so that, I think they both have good merits. So in the group, like say if you have so in my work in the courts, so I'm seeing a lot of I used to see a lot of men who were in trouble for family violence, and they need to go through a class in order to get their certificate and then possibly get their court case expunged or dismissed.
Mhm.
So the idea would be, you have 10 to 12 guys together, you go through a rigorous program of anger management
Yeah.
and emotions and all those things, and I've seen miracles like in 35 weeks. So they have to come, they can't just like quit and then think
How
that
many
they're okay.
sessions do they
Well,
usually?
30 to 35
Oh wow.
a week, so almost 2/3 of a year or more.
Wow.
And and oftentimes if they do stick with it and they take with it what they take, there is some fundamental change. Why? Because
The consistency. Right?
consistency
And
is
the
number
habit.
one, and then the actual sharing with other people and letting the secret out, and then seeing other people say, "Oh my God, that's the way I am,"
Yeah.
and how destructive I am, and compared with other people.
Right.
So that's been an effective way, I think, for a lot of men who've heretofore never went to any type of counseling or
Yeah.
anything because they're too proud or they didn't know or they couldn't afford it. And then individual counseling is also valuable because then so the component of that is like, so you're not shamed. So in a lot of the group things, not that you're shamed, but at least you're sharing. But at least in individual counseling, you're able to make a relationship with a therapist, and they always say trust. They always say that the research shows that it's not the technique, it's not the ethnicity of the therapist, it's not the type of therapy, it's the relationship of the therapist that makes the success of people change.
Yeah.
So you have to have a relationship, a good relationship. So if a man who is troubled and who has trauma and is violent and drugs, if they're able to let go and say their secret to one person at least, to let it out, very, very valuable.
Yeah.
I've actually, over the last few weeks, when I do some of my assessments, you can just see the person literally change from when they walk in, realizing that I'm actually pretty open and I'm actually not judgmental, which 99% of it they meet are judgmental, and I'm the one person, and then they're like, oh my God, there's actually one person in this whole world that's actually listening to my story, and once the secret is out, then the healing begins.
Right.
So it's kind of cliche, but
No,
it's
it
kinda,
totally
it's
makes
like, what was
sense.
that? Good Will Hunting. Matt Damon goes, "Let the healing begin."
Yeah.
Robin Williams was a therapist.
Right.
It's a good movie.
Oh my
It's an
God.
excellent
How
movie.
ironic is that?
Well,
Robin
he was
Williams,
trauma. See, yeah, Robin Williams. Well,
who everybody loves,
that's a very
who
good,
brought laughter into everyone's
good
homes,
segue. Yeah,
and
he
committed suicide.
because he was bipolar. He had bipolar for decades. So he was either under medication and or using self-medication, cocaine, alcohol, marijuana. We talked about marijuana last time.
Right.
But and so what pushed him over the edge? I think his depression actually caused an impulsive act, a suicidal act, because what happened was he had been. This is just what I read on the. It's nothing like I just read it on the internet about. He had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of Parkinson's disease.
I did not know
Yeah.
that.
He and then.
So that's what triggered the depression.
No, he's already depressed as
That's
a,
what
as a
intensified.
bipolar. Yeah.
Okay.
So it kind of he just envisioned him being incapacitated, a burden to his family, etc., etc. And at point, if it's aggressive, you end up also having dementia. So he wanted to take control and go out the way he wanted to go. But I think if he had, I think it's that typical man approach. Even though Robin Williams is an enlightened person as anyone, in the way very liberal, open and honest. Even someone like him, took the dark path, chose the path what he thought at the time was unselfish. Yeah, but it still ends up being a selfish act because you deny the family of taking care of you and finding a dignified way to leave this earth.
Well, on that note, because
But that
for
was his
some,
choice.
but on the topic of suicide, for something that is so prevalent, here on not just on Guam, but worldwide, but here,
we have a problem here.
yeah, isn't it much? I don't know the percentage, but I know it's much higher than.
I think per capita we have a pretty high rate. So something like per 100,000 people, our rate's always been around 30 to 35. And then like all over the world, in other nations, it's down. It's less than 30. It's like 20.
Well,
10.
it says. Well, this is 2016.
Per 100,000.
36.6 per 100,000.
Is that Guam?
Guam.
Yeah.
Whereas the U.S. is 13.42.
Exactly.
So, for something that clearly is a top 10, it's severe. It's a serious problem. Why do you think there's not the same amount? So this is about the same amount of people who have kidney issues. Problems. That's what it says. It has around the same amount of those who have kidney disease.
Okay.
But
So
you
kidney
see-
disease is super bad here.
Right.
Yeah.
But you see a lot more focus on something like that, whereas suicide doesn't really get that much of a, like, as far as the research goes of how to.
No, because there's the idea of physical health versus mental health. So it's still very stigmatized. In fact, I know that, like, for example, when someone commits suicide on this island, because we're like, what, 90% Catholic, there's a whole...
If it's still that high, it's still 90%.
However, 80 to 90%.
Yeah.
There's this whole lot of machinations that happen about, how should they have a funeral? It's like almost like, you talk to the priest, and
Oh, wow.
there's like it's almost like
Well, so much for
people
compassion.
stepping on eggshells about suicide.
Yeah.
So it's such a delicate topic that even in the church it's like, well, it's a mortal sin. What are they? We were taught in a Catholic school, if you commit suicide, you go straight to hell.
Yeah.
So it's
so many
very...
the things when it comes to the dogma of it, it's like, okay, that's 10 years ago. Like every few years, things change.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay.
But that when you hear something like that,
Yeah.
It's still that old kind of stigma.
Right.
It still remains.
It's still very taboo to probably
very
discuss
taboo,
it.
and it still is.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where when you open the paper and you see a young person, you're like, here in Guam, we know everybody.
Right.
So it's like, they're like, 22. What was that? Some disease or suicide?
Well, the sad thing is, you're seeing the numbers. They're going younger and younger.
Yeah, I think part of it, and I don't know if it's it happens on Guam too much, but part of it is the internet, the bullying. So in this stage, we'll see 6-year-olds, 7 and 8-year-olds saying they want to kill themselves. Yeah. Thankfully, they don't succeed. They actually tend to say more than actually attempt. But to have kids that young, to say that. So it may be happening on Guam. I don't see that as often, but I'm sure it's happening.
But it begs to the question of what is happening so horrendous to someone, because whether you're hurting yourself or hurting others, when people hurt people, right? That's what they say. And clearly, I mean, getting to the root. Do you think is that what we're doing? We're getting to the root of what has put someone in a position where they've run out of hope for just even living.
I can't put a handle it on Guam why we're still at 36. I even like 25 years ago when I first came back to Guam from school, it was still about 32, 33, and we've always still had the highest rate. I don't know what it is. The thing that I would say is that, and I was writing a note before we started, that and I might have told you this before in one of our talks before, that one of the biggest indicators of suicide as being imminent, pretty imminent, is hopelessness. Hopelessness. So that's key. So if someone were just depressed, one of the signs of depression is suicide, among other things.
Yeah.
So depression, you have poor or excess appetite, poor sleep or excessive sleep, anhedonia, which means things that were pleasurable, that gave you pleasure, doesn't give you pleasure anymore, lack of energy, feeling sad most of the day, thoughts of suicide, right? But it's not necessary to get a depression diagnosis. You don't have to have thoughts of suicide, right? So even under depression, suicide is, thankfully, even though it's still high, it's still rare-ish, right? So, but what kicks people over a depressed person to possible suicide is hopelessness. So you take Robin Williams, for example. That's a perfect example. He didn't see hope, even though he's a funny guy, even though he had bipolar disorder for decades. He managed to take care of it until it was, and this was just what I read, diagnosed with a pretty severe neurological disorder that would have rendered him pretty helpless. So helpless, hopeless equals suicide. Depressed. So remember, bipolar disorder is manic depression, which means they're mostly depressed with manic behaviors. So he was basically under the comic veneer. He was quite depressed, pretty much all the time, even though he was funny.
That's incredible.
I actually, knowing what I know, and I'm watching him
Mm-hmm.
on the Johnny Carson
Right.
or on Jay Leno, you can see this, like, the sadness.
It's a dark sometimes they had a very dark
Yeah.
But also I feel like when you're an actor, you're a performer, you get on stage and there's your hour to step out of what you're really feeling and
Yeah,
explore.
what you're really
Because I'll be honest with you,
compartmentalizing. Yeah, he could do
But
that.
I'm gonna just share a little bit about my experience in going through therapy and what I found. I think it's all helpful, and I mean whatever you have in your toolbox to help you is the more the better. But I feel like when I was healing through a childhood trauma that I didn't even realize I had until I had flashbacks. And at first I didn't know, I thought, well, maybe
it didn't happen.
Yeah, I didn't know if it happened
imagined
because it was a flashback, so I didn't know if it was. Then I started second guessing. I'm like, okay, I shouldn't even say anything because this is just a memory. This is just flashes, So first, not even knowing the validity of a thought. But then, but what I found was because I went to a therapist, a counselor, and at the time I was a dancer and acting in LA. But there was also it was called Expression Session. It was a class, and I found that it was like therapy for me because literally you'd get up on stage. It was kind of like impromptu. It was just but you would get up there and she'd give you like a one-liner, but it would always be something that resonated. And she was like, okay, you weren't there for me. And immediately that line would just evoke so much emotion. And I'm just wondering, aside from talk therapy, do you feel like different, like art therapy, dance therapy, do you think that there are other, or even nutrition? Because at the time I was also, when I was going through a depression, I mean, I had an eating disorder, I went through bulimia, I went through a lot of
all of your minerals and your
but a lot of self-loathing kind of
you're it's almost like self-destructive behaviors.
So I went through like a good couple years of that, and when I didn't menstruate for like 8 years, and I didn't know, it's like what came first, the egg or the chicken, right? And I thought, well, maybe because my hormones are off, and we don't realize that our endocrine system has so much to do with our mental, emotional health as well.
Absolutely. In fact, it's directly affecting.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I'm not an endocrinologist or a neurologist, but actually my doctor, as I was talking about earlier, is Dr. Hornucci. Actually, he's not.
Yes,
he's actually the wellness.
He's a functional.
Functional. He's like medicine, functional medicine.
Yeah.
I see
him too.
Yeah, he actually he with the lab tests and the urine tests, whatever, it shows the hormones, and it made a lot of sense of things that are lacking and things that. So there are certain pathways in your hormone system that if you're missing, and if you just add a little more, your emotions, your stress levels are all related.
Yeah.
And so.
I mean, look at women going through menopause. I mean, that's a clear indication where their emotions are all up and down.
Little self-disclosure, certain person.
And it's because the hormones are going through such massive transition.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like, what is this? I'm like, wow.
This is lowered estrogen. That's what this is.
Yeah, that's I guess menstruation.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, gosh, it's good that men, but I think men kind of go. Well, I think men go through it, but not in the dramatic way they do. It's lowering the testosterone.
Or they just respond to it differently.
I think men end up being more depressed, actually.
And internalizing.
Yeah, well, because if you lower your testosterone, that lowers the aggression, and then depression, and then what do you do with your depression? You self-medicate.
Right.
So you get a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs, drug use, which then leads to a lot
raging,
of problems and raging arrests, and legal problems, and then actually physical deterioration. So they don't take care of themselves. They have diabetes, they have kidney disease, liver disease, and they die prematurely. In fact, when I first started in the mid to late 90s with veterans, PTSD veterans of the Vietnam era, A lot of the veterans I was seeing in Hawaii when I was doing my pre-doctoral internship, a lot of the veterans were high having PTSD, but right beside it is heart disease, kidney disease, liver disease. A lot of it because they're abuse of their body and just a whole general imbalance.
This is a perfect segue to the psychoneuroimmunology.
And that's probably where I first started seeing the connections, because in graduate school, clinical psychology school, they don't teach you.
Yeah. It's
this
fairly new
stuff.
now that it's coming out.
It's fairly new, like 90s stuff. You know, we were a very behaviorist model, so we didn't talk about emotions too much. We just looked at observable behaviors, and of course, it's a psychology, so it was a medical school. It's a PhD in psychology.
But just so people understand what we're talking about, so with psychoneuroimmunology, it's showing the link between the psychological health, neurological health, and the immunological
system. System. And so that what I learned was, it's not just PTSD that was. I mean, it's like. It was funny because the VA would compartmentalize its veterans. It would say, well, you're going to go see a heart doctor, and you're going to go see a psychologist for your PTSD, and you're going to go see a psychiatrist for your psychiatric medicine as well. And then you go see the liver and the kidneys. And so what were learning was in the late 90s, we need to actually be more holistic. But you know, with the medical doctors, it's very hard to convince them. But they now are being a lot more open to what psychologists knew a long time ago.
Right.
And we could, you know, we see the connection.
Yeah.
And so, and it's all about balance. You fix one area, then hopefully one area gets better, and they all kind of work together.
That's what they found. They've done the research, and there's science behind it. They see that if you help the psychological part of it, the immune.
They actually see a change in the brain structures. With psychological therapies, so it was like bidirectional. So you would get so the way I see it is this: attacking a problem in two different ways is good. So for example, if you're talking about someone's profoundly depressed, what I often say is, let's try to get some psychiatric, maybe some psychotropic medication to kickstart them, to get them out of the depression, and then that gets them more primed to be open to therapy and changes. And then vice versa. If someone's profoundly depressed, if I try to get them to psychiatric, then I don't want to take some medicine. So then I try and work in a way to get them to a point where you need kind of both approaches, and then also work with the family. So to get them to do that side, to take care of your health, your psychiatric, neural health, and also just your psychological health.
Right.
So either way, if you can get them into not just looking at one way, you can get them in all ways.
Well, I mean, I was blessed in that you couldn't tell me that I was depressed at the time. I had no idea. I was drinking every day. I was living, it was completely self-destructive. So I didn't think I was depressed. But what got me to even look at that was because I had a physical ailment. I ended up at Cedars-Sinai. I was bleeding internally. So once I took care, cleaned up my gut, went completely raw vegan for a while, took all sugars, and basically dealt with my gut issue, I was like, wait a minute, I've never felt this kind of like happiness before. I always thought that I was kind of just like, but I didn't realize I was really not in very good shape.
And what happened was your gut and then your physical health it started to repair the mental health part, and you didn't even know it.
Right.
Until you start feeling better, and then you start taking care of yourself better. So,
and I don't think it was a coincidence, because around that same time is when I started having the flashbacks. It was like finally my body was like, I think she's at and she's at a point where she's okay enough that we could present her with this.
And with time, you were probably more mature. So like maybe when you were 21, you weren't ready.
Right.
And to get
back. Is
that
why that happens? Is that why you suppress memories?
I think people suppress memories and self-medicate for survival reasons. Again, it's an evolutionary thing. So, for example, I think if you have PTSD, right? If you keep suppressing it, we know that's not good.
Right.
And then you take your alcohol, and that's not good. But what it does is it preserves you, because if you just let it all out, you may get killed, or someone will kill you, or you will kill yourself.
Right.
So evolutionary, your body says, well, don't just keep this down. keep it down and suppress, because like if it comes out, who knows what happens.
Yeah.
But we all know that that's not good either. But if given a choice, the body tends to try and suppress things, because not only society doesn't like just crazy behavior,
Right.
also our body doesn't like to be revved up so much. So what
Because
do
that's also dealing with your sympathetic nervous system, right?
yeah.
And because that's
what
the
do
other
people
thing.
do when they're revved up? They take stuff to bring them down, like alcohol,
Right.
and their brains all revved up and hyper. They take ice
Yeah.
to also
To try to regulate
yeah,
somehow.
exactly, regulate in some way what's going on with them, until and unless they really deal with the internal, the psychological, the emotional, behavioral stuff.
So at the end of the day, it's about whatever tool you take, but to coming back to, it's about relationships, and the first most important relationship is a relationship with yourself.
So which would mean you got to admit to yourself
Yeah.
that you need help.
Right.
And people who get stuck aren't even there yet. Because I meet so many people, whether it's through court or through private or whatever, who are not even there yet, and they'll just continue to be sick. They'll continue to be users. They'll continue to be violent until and unless they start that internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And everyone's different on how they find their way. You're different.
Yeah.
I'm different. We're
Right.
all different. So
Right.
you just hope.
Earlier, you were talking a little bit about the evolution. We were just speaking initially about the masculine, feminine,
Mhm.
men and women. Caveman back in the day, and
Yeah.
how we've evolved. On the topic of stress, I've read before and heard another podcast and whatnot,
Mhm.
just about how right now, with everything we're exposed to, the amount of stress that we take on,
Okay.
it's like being in that fight or flight constantly,
Yeah.
which drains our adrenals, which wreaks
Yes.
havoc basically.
Yes, which is probably when I did take the blood test, the hormone test, I would suspect that everyone's cortisol level
Yeah,
is pretty high.
mine was as well.
Yeah, and that we, if without knowing it, our body tries so hard to get in balance. And unfortunately with me, when I'm under stress, I'm a stress eater.
Mm.
And then there are people who are stress drinkers.
Right.
There are people who are stress drug
Right.
users.
Mhm.
So my choice is
Or
food.
social media.
Or social media, or
Whatever's
TV,
gonna you feel
or
is gonna
addiction, porn addiction,
soothe,
or
right.
gambling addiction, right?
Right.
So whatever you
Self-soothe.
yeah, you try and self-soothe, try and balance yourself out, so we find it, we have to identify it, and then once we get back in balance, so when you start to kind of remove all the addictions, right?
Mhm.
You start to cleanse and get clean. You can just kind of face it and realize it and move forward and get help.
Yeah.
And it starts with assessing, like either blood test or seeing a psychologist or a therapist,
Mhm.
and gotta make that step. And a lot of people that I meet, they're just not even there yet. They're not even ready.
To admit it.
Well, and remember I told you earlier, it's a protective mechanism.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because when I start to talk about that with people, and even sometimes I'm only seeing them for an hour, or I'm often fearful of opening something I can't close.
How do you mean?
In other words, if just the other day I was talking with someone, everything was going good, and in the end I started talking about, I said, what about this relationship? What happened? Then they started talking about how it ended up tragically, and I was like, it was like an hour and a half already. I said, darn it, I opened up something.
Oh, focusing on the
Yeah,
negative.
a trauma or
Right.
negative, and that he had already kind of gone through it.
Wow.
It happened 18 years ago, but I reopened it. He started to. I was sitting there going, oh.
But do you think
We
that
were actually closing
but is
the
that
session. And
but
we're
is
just
that
about to go
healing?
home.
Is that healing, or is that something where if you continue to, like, how they say visit your past but don't live there? Don't start up paying rent.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't know what's better. I couldn't tell you what's better. I just know that if you live the moment,
Yeah.
and you've gone through a trauma,
Mhm.
and you kind of like, and it took my 18 years ago for this person. By the way, I told you this before, PTSD sometimes it's 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
people's
Yeah.
like- So they go through stretches of years of like, I'm good,
Yeah.
I'm good.
And
Then it pops up again. It's just like, oh, why did I have to think about
Yeah.
it again? So quick example, a current example is the Kobe Bryant thing.
Yes.
So like I thought it was good, like he's died a month ago, and then the memorial service is on TV today.
Oh, it was.
Yeah. So I said, don't watch it. You don't want to worry about it. It's just Kobe Bryant. He's just he's a basketball player. So I started just crying. So I mean, it's corny. I mean,
No, it's
but
not.
I mean,
It's
but
human.
but it's human. But it's human. But it was like, I didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
Because I'm good.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think people with their traumas.
Right.
I'm not equating the death of Kobe Bryant for me as a trauma. I'm saying the traumas that people actually suffer. They work so hard to get through it.
But
Whether it's good or bad.
But for someone empathic, it is just as. Because I could see, like, you would be surprised. I see, like, boonie dogs who are, like, skin and bones, and I'm like, I'm in my car, like, oh, I forgot to bring dog food in my trunk today. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I don't think it's,
It's who we are. But yeah, I mean, there's extremes one way or another. But the idea would be that I think a lot of people, without getting any therapy, they just get through it.
Yeah.
Whether they use drugs and alcohol.
Right.
And sometimes they just say to themselves, I'm done. I'm done. I'm over it. And then when I'm talking with them and I reopen it, it's like, oof, how do I close it again? So I spend a little more time to process it with them and just close it back up. But that's real, and that's something that it says to me that's why they're here in front of me. That's just, even though that wasn't what we're talking about, that's part and parcel of that individual, why they're here in the first place.
For me, what I found is when I could talk about something and no longer get emotional about it, it's no longer, I'm no longer holding it. And that's when I'm able to release the story. But until that point, I'm probably going to repeat the story, if I have a breakdown or whatnot, it's like, and if the story still comes up, I still need to heal in whatever way, So for me, it's been like, sometimes I tell, because I've read a lot about, with Abraham Hicks and the whole, like, new, Abraham Hicks. So basically, it's very much of a, I don't even know how to describe her, but she's all about not getting stuck in the story. And living in the present, and whatnot. And it's definitely words to live by, but for some, it's not that easy. Just be like, okay, you can't just be like, that happened, although it was 30 years ago. If you haven't addressed it, it's as fresh as yesterday.
And I don't know if we're wrapping up, but the idea would be that it's more complicated because if you have multiple traumas, that complicates it more.
Right.
So the gentleman that I was talking to, that's just one in a series of deaths and stuff and lots of stuff. So that's why it's entangled in this thing. So when it came up, it's not, the story is still there, and I don't think it'll go away because it's entangled in there.
Well, I wonder, when they talk about conscious awareness of being in the present moment. I mean, that's why the whole thing with yoga and meditation is about, or even chanting, or when you're in prayer, saying the rosaries, about being in the moment. About focusing, because you're so involved, the mantra.
It just keeps you.
It keeps you focused on the moment. At least having, I think I read about, at least the first 30 minutes of your day should be put on reserve just for those kinds of
well, the
practices.
meditation and present focus stuff is not, and the research is showing that actually works with almost every single mental illness. PTSD especially, because they're stuck in the past, the traumatic past. You got to just keep reminding them that this is the year 2020. It's February. Let's go with what's going on now. So, and that works also with people who are having even depression, anxiety, especially anxiety. It's like, look, what's going on?
High percentage.
You get them aware of what's going on, and then handling it there instead of feeling like, oh my God, I'm like gonna die right now.
Right.
So,
well, I just wanted to close with this because I found this to be quite astonishing. According to the National Science Foundation, an average person has about 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. Of those, 80% are negative and 95% are repetitive thoughts.
Wow.
If you repeat those negative thoughts, we think negative way more often than we think positive. So it's basically about deprogramming and reprogramming. I mean, really making the conscious effort. And not just be like, oh, think positive, love and light, but no, to actually resonate and energetically come from that
That's
space.
what therapy is. See, that's why we get paid, because even though if you read that, you have to just train yourself to replace the alternative thoughts with all the destructive thoughts that's basically been plaguing your life forever.
I used to do this whole thing. I would clap my hand, do something physical, and say cancel, cancel. Like if I felt it coming on, be like cancel, cancel, and then try to switch it up with something.
That's thought stopping.
Oh, so that's an actual
Yeah,
word.
that's a
It's
something.
an actual technique.
That's what we teach people with PTSD and anxiety, OCD, especially OCD.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's always so enlightening to have you in to speak
I
about.
was just looking high. Yes. You're welcome.
Thank you so much,
Audience.
Doctor. And thank you. You can catch this show and all others of Conscious Living on the KUAM Podcast Network on Spotify, Pandora, SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Peace out.